Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you, Matt, for the introduction. I'm going to do something a little different. I don't like slides, so you guys get to look at me for a minute while I talk. I did bring one slide for the close. As Matt mentioned, I've become known for ransomware negotiation, but first founded GroupSense as a cyber reconnaissance and digital risk company. What that means is that we're looking for external indicators of attack or threats to customers outside the network. How we ended up working in the ransomware space was sort of fortuitous. Our team specializes in engaging with threat actors on a daily basis. We have team members that speak some 15 different languages. So we're on the dark web, we're on the chat rooms, we're talking to threat actors every day. One of the things that we do for our customers is we detect what is called initial access brokers. And forgive me if this was explained in the previous presentation, I couldn't hear it, but the initial access broker is effectively a threat actor or a hacker who gains network access, persistent network access, and then sells that access on an underground market. The buyers of that access are often the ransomware operators, the ones that you hear about on the news, Conti and DarkSide and Black Matter and groups like that. They buy the access from the initial access brokers, and then they execute their ransomware attack sometime after exfiltrating some data for the extortion. Early on, right before COVID, we detected an initial access broker that had access to a company. Long story short, that company ended up in a ransomware incident. And because of our background in dealing directly with threat actors on the underground, we were asked to engage that threat actor in a negotiation. That went very well. And following that case, we were brought in by law firms and cyber insurance companies to help with this in a repeated fashion, sort of snowballed over time. Now we have a developed practice with multiple negotiators and frameworks around the desired outcomes for customers. So what does it mean to be in the ransomware response business? Effectively, on the front end, we're brought in first to help the victim understand what the potential total, I like to use the word blast radius or impact of the ransomware attack is. That's asking hard questions about business operations interruption, which is some of the obvious outcomes from ransomware, but also talking about the extortion, the effect of that extortion from a public relations perspective, a brand perspective, a customer and partner confidence perspective, and even an employee perspective. The idea is on that front end of that case, before we ever engage a threat actor, we're trying to make a quantitative business decision with the client, as quantitative as possible, a business decision with the client, whether to engage the threat actor at all. In some cases, and let's say over the last couple of years, maybe 20% of the cases, this is the outcome. We decide not to engage, and that's a desired outcome in most cases. That usually happens when the customer has good backups, for example, or recovery capabilities. The rest of the time, the next step occurs, which is we become the liaison, if you will, between the victim and the threat actor. And we guide them through a negotiation in order to reduce the ransom amount to the minimum amount possible. There's a process behind this. It takes some understanding of the threat actors and who you're dealing with and their playbook. As part of that process, we will also work with the client to make sure that they are compliant with local and national laws, including international sanctions that may be in effect for some of the victims some of the threat actors that they may end up making a crypto payment to. On the back end of the negotiation, we are basically making sure that we get the deliverables that the threat actor has promised, that those deliverables work, and that the data that was exfiltrated is destroyed. Of course, there's a large asterisk to that last part. I'm sure it will come up in the Q&A. We also work with the client to do the actual crypto transfer. So we'll work with their bank and numerous crypto brokers to make sure that the money gets, the agreed on amount gets to the threat actor effectively. After doing many of these cases, we started to see sort of a distilled list of how the threat actors gained access to the networks. And fortunately for the industry, many of these things are preventable. And they do boil down to some very basic cyber hygiene items. Those include basic password policy, basic credential use policy, and MFA, for example. Add to that endpoint control and some basic offsite backup capability, and you've got a robust response plan and prevention plan that could mitigate up to 90% of your risk right off the bat. Very simple things. I know it was mentioned in the previous presentation, the typical attacks are not that sophisticated most of the time. Now, the groups that are attacking the larger and targeting the larger companies legitimately instead of the more sort of opportunistic approach are executing 0 days. But most of the attacks that we're seeing are occurring around very basic password reuse, credential stuffing, very simple methods. Keep in mind that the threat actors, as you saw in the previous presentation, they're an organization. They have effectively a business and go-to-market plan like a business would, and they have an ROI for that plan. So the getting access in the simplest and least expensive way is in their best interest. So the second thing that we learned doing these cases is on the response side, even the most sophisticated organizations, the largest well-known publicly traded organizations, some of which you've heard about on the news, who have paid for and designed and done tabletops around incident response, were missing fundamental parts that were specific to ransomware in that plan. And first and foremost, and I don't want to laugh at it, but if you think about it, many times the plan itself is a file, and that file is on a file share, and that file share is encrypted. So simply printing out the plan is part of the plan. The other parts revolve around the financial compliance, and most specific to ransomware is the amount of pressure applied to the business. That pressure is applied both from the operational interruption, but it is also applied via the extortion component. Keep in mind that these threat actors are not just threatening to dump your data, but they will employ sometimes call centers to call your employees, your partners, and your constituents to let them know that you're not being good stewards of their data, to apply pressure. That's a tremendous amount of pressure that is applied to a business that is different than a traditional breach response that causes some unnatural actions in the organization. I'd like to bring up a quick slide to talk about the do's and don'ts that we've learned on ransomware response and negotiation. I know it's a busy slide. It is my only slide. I fit everything in a single slide. So the don'ts are pretty simple. There's not too many. First, this is occurring pretty frequently to businesses. It's not a new thing. Incident responders and ransomware response teams have a playbook, and this is recoverable. If you have a plan in place, stick to that plan. The second thing is don't engage until you absolutely have to. The threat actors are going to leave behind a ransom note that's going to compel you to contact them as soon as possible, sometimes with some threats around the time frame where the price may increase or something similar. When you visit that ransomware site that is on the ransomware note, a clock starts. That clock is to apply, again, some pressure on your organization with a threat attached to it saying that they will either double the price when the clock runs down, or they may leak data over time and or dump all of the data when the clock reaches zero. You don't want to start that clock until you absolutely have to, and that you want to have a plan in place in the organization, and that plan should include the negotiation itself, but also the financial components, the approvals needed to wire money, and frankly, some kind of budget. The other thing is don't shut down your machines. There's two main reasons for this. And kindly enough, the threat actors do often say this in their ransom note. Shutting down your machines because of the kinds of malware that are used to employ the ransomware can cause corrupted files. And so we don't want that. Second, as part of your response, ideally you have an incident response team in your network. They're trying to figure out the attack vector, how the threat actor gained access, and close the door. That process itself is hindered considerably when machines are turned off. Don't bury your head, and this really revolves around the extortion part. Often we engage with a company who's very confident about their backup plan and their restoration process. but they don't take into consideration the potential PR, brand damage, and damage to their constituents' private data that is being dumped on these dark websites and then later amplified on ClearNet sites. So that has to be taken into consideration before you walk away from the negotiation table. The other thing that we've seen is the backup and restoration process confidence is sometimes quickly shattered when the company goes back and attempts to start the process and realizes that it's going to take them weeks to restore. Also, engage legal counsel. Depending on where you live, and likely virtually anywhere, there are laws that dictate the disclosure requirements around a breach. In those disclosure requirements often also have a timer. You have sometimes 72 hours to notify affected parties. Engage PR support. So everything that you say publicly about this is going to impact your company, your brand, your valuation. While we're not a PR firm or a law firm for that matter, the general advice we give in this category is you want to be as transparent as possible, as quickly as possible, within your knowledge boundaries. So there are many things that are in play that we are not necessarily confident about yet. Those things cannot be communicated. Everything that we know and what the impact is and the fallout should be communicated and as transparently as possible to the affected parties. I mentioned engaging IR, that's incident response. Certainly, we want to engage these folks early in the process. Your first call might be to your lawyer, the second one to your PR firm, the third to your cyber insurance company, and the fourth should be to the IR firm. That IR firm is there to make sure that we understand how the threat actors gained access and that they cannot get back into the network. As you imagine, the threat actors already have a tremendous amount of leverage. Adding to that leverage by allowing them the threat to actually regain access and do more damage is not helpful in a negotiation. We've actually seen cases where during the actual negotiation of one threat actor, we're about to make a settlement and a second threat actor encrypts the first threat actor's files through a different attack vector. These are the types of complications that you're trying to avoid by having IR do their job and make sure that the threat actors can't get back into the network. Obviously, I mentioned the cyber insurance. If you have it, contact it. The main thing that we've seen and mistakes we've seen around cyber insurance is that many companies don't read their policy. There are specific requirements in the response process that you're liable for. That is in the fine print. You need to read it and understand it. Bring in a professional responder. While negotiation itself is a pretty well-known discipline, negotiation on a dark website over chat with a person whose language is English as second or third language has nuances to it. On top of that, there's a cyber criminal organization with a playbook and a plan and leverage. In most negotiation scenarios, if you read any of the great negotiation books by Chris Voss or Getting to Yes or any of those books, a lot of times they assume that you can either speak to, see, or hear the person, the opponent that you're negotiating with. That is not the case here. It is all done over text. So, for example, the first person in the organization that you may be talking to on the ransomware response in the threat actor side may not speak English at all. In fact, the things that they're pasting into the chat are probably from a script that they have. That means that when you respond to them, they're taking what you say and pasting it in to Google Translate, for example. So understanding the words you're using and how those words translate into Ukrainian or Russian, and how the tone and context of those words translate into Ukrainian or Russian are fundamental to that communication and can actually deeply impact the outcome of a negotiation. These are all the things that a professional responder brings to the table. I mentioned sanctions. All over the world, companies have lists of countries and or entities that thou shalt not transact with. Understanding if the threat actors that you're dealing with are on that list or affiliated with that list is fundamental to the process. We also recommend that everyone engages law enforcement, not because we expect law enforcement, Interpol or FBI to actually do anything meaningful in the negotiation and or the outcome, but we want them to take inventory of the attack. We want them to know how many of these people are getting hit, how often and how much they're paying. And then of course, monitor for your data after the fact. These bad guys have taken your data. They're guaranteed they're not going to dump it anywhere or sell it. You need to monitor and make sure they don't do that. I'll stop there, and we have a few minutes left for Q&A.
Great, thank you very much there, Kurtis. Got a few questions that come in the Q&A, but there's one that I want to ask myself first, and it's obviously the journalistic instinct in me. You're talking about dealing with threat actors, criminals in this space, and when you do engage with them, how can you actually trust that they're going to do what they say they're going to do if they agree to some things?
Yeah, so in most cases, although there are single actor cases, in most cases, these threat actors have a brand as well that they're trying to maintain. So if word got out that they weren't honoring ransoms, or the decryptors didn't work, or they didn't delete the data, less people would pay ransom. So they're incented to do so. In the myriad of cases that we've done, we've maybe had one where the threat actor didn't honor it, and in virtually every case they have. But yes, they have no accountability, so it is risk.
Yeah, and to move on to the questions that we've got that have come in, the first one here is, can small businesses protect themselves or recover post-incident by operating, if they're operating on the major cloud platforms such as Google, Slack, etc., and effectively outsourcing defense and recover to much bigger players?
That's a very nuanced question. I'm going to try to answer that as quickly as possible. But certainly, like cloud providers like from Microsoft Azure, for example, has a replication system that they claim can repair, an encrypted, like for example, O365 instance or something like that. So that I think the recovery capabilities are there. But one of the mistakes that a lot of companies make is they assume that moving their operations to the cloud has done what you said, that the cloud provider is going to secure them. In most cases, this is not true. They need to take the same security steps that they take for their internal network as they do for the data. They're just moving their data and operations to someone else's computer. It doesn't mean that they don't, the same security paradigms don't apply.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And with with another question that we've got that's come in here, what do companies need to understand most about ransomware attacks from all of the experience you've had and all the cases that you've dealt with? What's the one thing that they don't currently necessarily understand?
Well, so I think one of the misconceptions is that there are some ways to decrypt these files. There typically is not. There's been very rare cases where that has worked. And the negative result from that belief is that you can Google, for example, or search, for example, for decrypt Ryuk or something similar to that, and you will get Google responses of companies that claim to be able to do this. They cannot do this. What they actually do is they'll negotiate without your knowledge or consent, get a price from the threat actor, buy the decryptors, and then sell them to you at a markup. So there's a lot of scammers out there in the ransomware response space. I would recommend that you go to a cyber law firm or an insurance provider to find your response firm. They're vetted.
Yeah, and one final question here, and I hope it's not from somebody who has been impacted by ransomware recently. If we agree to pay the ransom, how do we engage the threat actor?
Well, so all of the engagement typically happens over a victim site on the dark web that is customized to the victim. Once you start the negotiation, they have a playbook. I don't recommend you do this yourself, but if you do, I do have a couple recommendations quickly. That is, don't be antagonistic, be slightly deferent, be very professional, and negotiate in good faith. And what I mean by that is, deception is a tool in negotiation. I don't recommend you use it here if you can avoid it. And that's because often the threat actors have a copy of your finances. They have a copy of your cyber insurance policy. You can't lie to them. So you lose credibility. So let's assume you get through that process. After that, they're going to give you, and somewhere in the process, they're going to give you a digital currency wallet. And they're going to give you instruction on how to take your fiat currency in the bank and get it into a brokerage, into that wallet. All of these things are better handled by someone who does it every day to make sure. There's a lot of risk in moving money around like that. So I would recommend not doing this yourself.
Yeah, some very important points there. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate you being here and being able to share some of those insights. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.